So I thought I'd take you through the full setup of this 486 DX 66 megahertz machine. I picked this little machine up yesterday at my local PC recycler. It's a compact ProLina 466 machine. It's got, I believe, 20 megabytes of RAM in it, 46 DX66 processor. It seems like a pretty decent little machine, and for $20 I couldn't pass it up. I didn't see it post when I bought it, so I took a leap of faith that for $20 it would work. Done a bit of research on the web. There's a couple things to note here. I do have the case off. I have the full case for it. There's a decal here on the top that shows all the jumper settings for the motherboard. It had a CD-ROM drive originally installed down here. I've gone ahead and swapped in my 5¼ inch 1.2 megabyte floppy drive because I'll be using this to do floppy imaging for my TRS-80 Model 4. They removed the hard drive while I was there yesterday. They do hard drive destruction, and so I couldn't take the hard drive that was with it. I've got a 2 gigabyte hard drive here installed. This hard drive already had a DOS partition on it, and the machine actually boots from the hard drive, but I'm going to go ahead and completely start from scratch on this build. So it's got onboard VGA, COM ports, parallel printer port. It's a PS2 mouse and keyboard. Anyhow, on the web you can find images of DOS 622, and that's what I'm going to use to build it. On my main Windows 10 machine, I used WinImage, I believe, to image these 3 floppies. I'm using an external USB 3.5 inch floppy drive. First disk is bootable, so I'm going to go ahead and insert that disk into drive A so it'll boot. An interesting tidbit about this machine is I found no way to get into the BIOS from the keyboard. F1, F10, F2, delete, etc. None of those actually get me into the BIOS. However, the BIOS did enough auto detect, I believe, to see the floppy drive correctly. It did detect the different hard drive and reconfigured. It looks like for this machine there's actually a setup floppy used to get into the BIOS, and we'll talk about that later. Anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and start the machine up. Sorry about the jerkiness of the camera. The camera mount that I built really isn't meant to do this kind of movement with. And I'll power it up. And we should get the little memory test. It'll go to 20 meg. It just did a seek test on both floppy drives. And it's now booting from the 1.44 megabyte floppy, the DOS 622A install floppy. I am reaching around the keyboard here, and it's a bit of a battle, or reaching around the camera to get to the little keyboard. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and exit straight down to DOS. I'm doing that because I want to delete, let's see, and press F3 again. I want to delete the current partition on that hard drive. It's got one 2 gigabyte partition, and I'm actually going to set up multiple, probably a 1 gigabyte C partition and 2 512 megabyte D&E partitions. I'm doing this to support some other software I want to install on here and play with. Anyhow, I should find F-disk on this floppy, and it's here. I'm going to go ahead and run F-disk, and I'm just going to delete the partitions. So if we take a look at the partition information, we can see there's one primary DOS partition. It occupies the full 2 gig. I'm going to go ahead and delete that partition. It was the primary DOS. What partition do you want to delete? Partition 1. The volume label is MS DOS TRS-80 This little keyboard has problems. Some of the keys are very hard to use. So there is no longer a bootable partition on this hard drive. After you F-disk, you need to reboot the machine. This should go out to the A floppy, which it's doing, and boot from the A floppy. And we'll go ahead and walk through the DOS 622 installation. This machine would run Windows 95 or Windows 98. It kind of meets the minimum spec for Windows 98 with a 486 DX 66 processor. At this point, I'm really not interested in putting any version of Windows on here. That may happen at a future date. If you do go out and look for DOS 622 installation media, make sure it is the full version and not the upgrade version. If it's the upgrade version, you won't be able to install to a blank hard drive this way. So we want to configure an allocated disk space. I think that just created crud, a full 2 GB hard drive partition, and that's not what I wanted. I should have looked at the menu closer, because I know there's a way in there to manually F-disk, I believe from the installer. If not, I'll have to drop back down to DOS off the floppy and manually create the partitions. No, see, I didn't want this. I really don't care about this format at the moment. I'm just going to restart the machine to get booted from floppy again. I should get the option here again in the setup to drop down to DOS booted from the floppy and clean this up myself. Hopefully I'll get the option here and it won't try to continue. I don't want to format the hard drive. Looks like we're trapped letting the format finish, so I'll come back after this format has completed. So at this point, it's moved through formatting that C drive itself, and I'm going to use the F3 option to drop back down to DOS from the floppy, and I'm going to do a manual F-disk. I'm sure there was a way to do this in the setup. There should be a single partition here again. It's the primary DOS. I'm going to delete that partition. I want to delete partition 1. It has no volume label. I'm going to create a primary DOS partition. Just looking at the drive, I don't want to use the maximum size. I'm going to use 50%. If I can find the percent symbol on this keyboard. There it is, Shift 5, which is what it should have been. I'm now going to create another partition. This one will be an extended DOS partition. It will be the other 50% of the drive. It now wants me to define logical disks within that partition. And I'm going to go 50% again, which will become the D drive. And I'm going to use the other 50% to create an E drive. And so we've now partitioned that hard drive, that 2 GB hard drive, into 3 partitions: a 1 GB, a 512 meg, a 502 meg, and a second 502 meg. If we escape out now, it's going to ask us to restart the machine. and then I will go ahead and install DOS 622 on that 1 GB C partition. Of course, it's cranking through the floppy boot. I want to go ahead and install DOS. It's found a C drive that's unformatted, and I'm going to let it go ahead and format that new C drive partition. I'll let this run and then come back. So Setup's gone ahead and finished formatting the C drive, and it detects there's an unformatted G drive, and I'll let it go ahead and format it as well. Obviously Rosie has joined us with her little clicky toenails. And it's now finished formatting the D drive. I'll go ahead and let it format the E drive now. So the formatting of the E drive is just about to finish up here. And then the DOS setup should move on to the next steps. And that's getting the files copied to the C drive. Yep, so I'm United States. All of those settings are fine. It'll go ahead and create a DOS folder on the C drive to put the MS-DOS files in. And now it'll simply just go ahead and copy contents from the 3 install floppies. And this will take a bit. It'll prompt me a couple times to mount the next 2 floppies, and we'll come back when the files are copied. So the system's asked me to move on to floppy 2. I'll eject floppy 1. Go ahead and get floppy 2 in the drive, and we'll continue. And we're on to floppy 3. Get floppy 2 out. We've got floppy 3 here. And this should finish copying all the files to the C drive. So the setup's about to finish. It wants me to remove all floppy drives. So I'll remove floppy 3. And we're going to go ahead and restart the computer, and it should boot from the C drive. And we should have, and there it is, booting from the hard drive. We've now got a DOS 622 machine. There should be a DOS folder on here. First thing I'm going to do is edit the auto exec, as I want to add DOS key to this. DOS key lets you recall previous commands. I want to save that out. Oops. This little keyboard's hard to use. Exit. No, I don't want to save it. And I'll go ahead and restart one more time. And I should now be able to use the up and down arrow keys to recall previous commands. That's what DOS key gives me. Makes the system a bit easier to use. I should have a formatted D drive on the hard drive, and I do. Oops, got stuff falling off the desk here. And I should have a formatted E drive, which we do. So we've got through basically a DOS install to a freshly F-disk and formatted hard drive. So the next thing I needed to tackle here was how to get into the BIOS on this machine. Luckily, when I installed the hard drive in this and powered it up, the machine actually went out and detected the hard drive was different, and I got a pop-up basically saying hard drive is different. Do you want to use the configuration for this hard drive, and I said yes, because I found no way to get into the BIOS from the keyboard, as I mentioned earlier. After some research on the web, it appears that the BIOS is actually accessible from a bootable floppy. I found a lot of reference to sp1363.exe. I had a hard time finding that file. Something else led me to this sp1363.1.exe, which has the BIOS setup stuff in it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a folder here on the C drive. I'm going to copy that file from the A floppy. So a note about this file is it's a 16-bit file. I was not able to execute this file on my Windows 10 machine to be able to create the floppy over there. Like I said, luckily the BIOS auto-detected the hard drive and the floppy drive correctly, so I could get DOS installed on it. Kind of a backwards approach here, but I still want to have access to the BIOS. So we'll get that file copied onto the local hard drive, and we'll run it sp13.631. And it basically tells me this is the compact PC diagnostics and setup disk. It's got the ProLine A family in there. It requires a 1.44 meg floppy to write to. I need to page down. Page down. I got to type agree to their licensing. I've got the same disk in the A drive that I used to transfer that executable over with, and I'm just going to write over the top of it. And it's now writing an image onto that floppy, which should be a bootable image. Need to boot from the setup floppy in order to access the BIOS. So the installation is completed. It has hopefully written the correct image to the A drive. I know I'll need to reboot the machine from the A drive. There's a lot of stuff on here. I'm going to go ahead and restart the machine. Control delete. And it should now boot from the A floppy. Which it's doing. So we'll let the setup and diagnostic software get installed. I've plugged in a serial mouse on the machine. I don't have a PS2 mouse. Let's see if it finds it. It did. We're going to work in English. So I'm going to go ahead and look at computer setup. And this may take up to 2 minutes. It's an interesting message. As you can probably hear, it's loading stuff from the floppy. I am perfectly happy with that date time. It's not critical to me, those are correct. I'm not sure exactly what it's doing at this point. So it's done something with power management. And we're into the setup. So we've got a compact ProLine A 466 machine, 46 DX2, 66 megahertz, 20 megs. And the system ID, I did try searching the system ID on the compact support site, and it didn't actually come up as a valid machine. I'll try to get something underneath the mouse here to make it scroll around a little easier. It senses that we've got a 1.44 meg 3.5 inch on A and a 1.2 megabyte 5.25 on B, and then we've got that 2 gigabyte hard drive. I don't actually know what happens if I click in here, so obviously here's where I can select my floppy types. Luckily it has figured them out correctly ahead of time. look at all these. I'm really not interested in power management. We'll leave it off. VGA 16-bit, non-interlace 72 Hertz. We'll just leave those at the defaults. On the motherboard, there were two serial interfaces. These look like the normal defaults. Bidirectional parallel port, and I believe that's the normal default for LPT1. I don't need a power on password. Anyhow, there's the little BIOS setup utility. I didn't need to change anything. We'll let it reboot from the floppy here. And it said something about managing the diagnostics partition on the hard drive, which we obviously don't have, since I don't have a factory hard drive for the Polina A machine here. Let it keep doing its thing. English again. Did not see the mouse this time. I don't know what. Create diagnostics partition. Upgrade. I'm not sure I really want to do that. Worst case is I'll blow a partition away. So we obviously don't want to do this. I'm not really interested in having the diagnostics partition. I think that's everything we can do at this point from this little setup floppy. It was very unhappy with the video mode there for a second. I'll remove that floppy and get it into a little storage box here. And then we'll let the machine go ahead and boot from the C drive again. Which it's doing. Anyhow, so there's a quick tutorial on getting DOS 622 onto an older machine. We looked a little bit at F-disk, DOS setup, and then I've ended up with a little, DOS machine on a 46DX66. This will make a good platform for DOS gaming. The machine itself has 3 ISA slots that you really can't see back here on this riser card, which will be useful. Anyhow, I hope this little video tutorial helped, and we'll talk soon. Bye.